Welcome to DNX Solutions podcast, leading the way in cloud modernization services.
Hello everyone and welcome. My name's Griffin. I'm the CTO at DNX Solutions. Today we're diving into one of the most pressing challenges facing organizations in 2025, securing artificial intelligence implementations. You know, it's fascinating. We're living through a tipping point that's transforming how businesses operate, but this comes unprecedented security challenges. Did you know that over 80% of organizations have employees using unauthorized AI tools, often with sensitive company data? That's right. So within their quest for productivity, employees are inadvertently creating significant security risks for their companies. Today, it's my pleasure to bring three distinguished experts to unpack complex landscape of AI security. We've got Shannon, who's the practice lead for DNX Solutions. I'm welcomed by Dushan from Subrosa AI, whose team is tackling that growing challenge of shadow AI use cases. And I've got Gerardo, our AWS specialist as well. We're going to explore everything from prompt injection attacks to data protection, but most importantly, how organizations can enable innovation while maintaining that robust security. But before we dive in, I want to set the scene a little bit with a real-world example that perfectly illustrates what we're up against. Picture this, if you will. Go with me here. A car dealership, for example, implements an AI chatbot to improve that customer service. Sounds great, right? However, without those proper security controls, a clever user in the background manages to manipulate the chatbot into offering the vehicle well under market value. And we've actually heard a story about this where they got a car for $1. Now, this is just one example of where an AI implementation outpaces the security measures in place. But let's start with a broad view. Team, what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys are seeing across organizations, regarding that AI adoption and security? Shannon, I'm going to start with you, then we'll go across the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. I guess one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing right now is implementation complexity overall, right? So, organizations today are struggling with existing workflows and how to integrate AI workflows into that, right? There's challenges of proper CI/CD integration for AI workloads, and there's a difficulty maintaining security controls throughout the process of using AI. So it's kind of a new world in a way when it comes to AI, and it's causing a lot of issues when it comes to security governance, risk management. A lot of people don't know how to handle that complexity and power that comes with using an AI tool in the organization.
Makes sense. Gerardo, I'm going to come to you because Dushan, I've got a very important question for you in a moment, but Gerardo.
Look, I agree with you. Gen AI is center of attention for a lot of our customers, and a lot of them start experimenting, sometimes with any Gen AI application that they can find. And it's very interesting because this is a technology that has the potential to transform the capabilities of entire industries, right? Almost every corner in a business can be improved with technologies like this. But the challenges we're seeing is that jumping from that experimentation to actually getting it running in production at scale, there are many things that need to be checked. One of those is security and compliance. There's a lot of layers, and we can dive deeper in today's chat about this. But getting an application leveraging Gen AI in a secure way, protecting privacy, and making sure that it does what it's actually intended to do, is one angle. The second angle is this is a new paradigm for builders where we're dealing with systems that are not deterministic. And so in the database world, you run a SQL query or a query, and the data you get, you can trust it. Now you have a system that just comes up with stuff, pretty smart stuff, but to what degree would that fit a use case? That's a challenge that customers are going through at the moment.
So that the intersection between explainability and interpretability as well, right? So you're absolutely right. Deterministic results are are results. You know what they are. But now our ability to go, well, do I trust this? And can I explain this answer as well? It's super interesting and it's super complex.
Yeah, and to what degree you're taking risks when you're implementing these systems sometimes, and to what degree does your use case allow for certain levels of risk? It's just interesting. These two things, security and the non-deterministic nature of it, makes it very interesting to actually implement them in production and scale them out.
Absolutely.
I think it's actually quite an interesting point. The non-determinism is something people don't think about that much. Even like if you in between multiple iterations of a given model, testing for regressions and testing for behaviors, and I think the non-determinism, not thinking about that enough, and then trying to apply AI to any business case without necessarily thinking about the compliance needs around it or around the sensitivity to inaccuracy. People are trying to run ahead with building before they've considered those things. And I think that's another thing that increasingly compliance frameworks are becoming aware of this as far as traceability. So I think that things will catch up, but it's a very important point. I think it's probably not front of mind when people think about security. They're more focused on sort of the front door type attacks like prompt injections, which was mentioned before.
Yep.
It's definitely a valid threat case, but I think like there's a very deep set of issues here. And then data use, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit.
I think the hardest part as well is when you get into like deep learning, for example, right? Because trying to understand or unpack a neural network, you can't, because the constructs change from a deep learning perspective. I'm just going into deep ML here. That's really hard to try and figure out and provide explainability because it changes consistently. Whereas, typical sort of agentic-based approaches to AI, for example, where you have prompt on prompt on prompt, that has a slightly different level of degree and complexity, but it's not as hard or as complex. We could talk about this, consistently, clearly for a long time. But I want to, Dushan, I want to come to you because I'm super curious about particularly the stuff that you guys are doing and what you're seeing in the market in terms of shadow AI. Like we mentioned it before in the preamble, but what are your thoughts around that?
So our product is focused more currently on protecting the enterprises who are adopting AI tools. So you said before that 80% statistic of shadow use, that's quite a significant number. So that's people who have used AI in some capacity with business data. The customers we speak to have probably visibility is their biggest issue. So they don't necessarily have visibility into what data is actually being sent or how their data boundary might be being violated. So they might have DNS, they might have IP traffic logs, but they don't actually have visibility into the application layer. So without visibility, they can't make data-informed risk decisions. They don't know if they're maintaining their compliance, their data policies, and they don't really, they also, when you see the shadow use, they don't have ability to understand where that's happening, because if they have a big pocket of shadow use, that actually presents probably a business opportunity that they might want to take advantage of or want to explore, and they don't see that. And then coming from visibility, they don't really have a means to enforce controls around their data boundaries in a way that enables the AI use, but protects from inappropriate data being sent. And the sort of tools that exist in market are kind of a bit more binary about like wide open or blocked. And this actually, what happens here, what we've seen is it creates normalized deviance where people will effectively want to use these tools for productivity. They won't be able to use it at work and they'll find side channels. So what we're looking to do with our product is enable safe use, reduce the impetus for these things, and then provide the security and the visibility that companies need for their compliance, for their security, for their audits, whatever it ends up being. And then also around like who's using the tools, if it's being used by inappropriate people, if it's being used for inappropriate tasks, if there's a particularly high sensitivity to errors, and a hallucination would be very impactful. Visibility into all those things is what we're trying to do.
It's a really interesting point though, because there's obviously opportunity here, right, in terms of, if we sort of look at the security angle side, right, yes, putting controls and guardrails and stuff like that to prevent data leakage, absolutely super critical. There's another angle here from an opportunity perspective to uncover use cases.
Totally.
And to go, why are you using it? How can we better utilize other tools? Maybe the tool sets that you're using is right, but just in a different way.
Totally. So we learned this from talking to a customer, and this is a CIO of a property company, and what he told us is, this is great, but if you can give me more visibility into this shadow use, it's like if all my staff are using a tool that I don't know about and they're getting productivity benefits from it. Now that I can see this, I can learn more about this, I can work with them on managing the risks, and then I can actually enable sanctioned use of this tool, and then everybody benefits from using it. And then I'm also protecting my data and meeting the needs of my compliance or my audits or my security or whatever it ends up being. So it's a really, really impactful thing. And I think security tools, rather like security doesn't work well when they're the police. People just want to vector around it. So having, like, working with this, making it a business enabler while providing controls is how you win. And that's what we're trying to do with our product.
Yeah, interesting. Because it's a broad stroke sort of view, really, isn't it, across the different parts of the organisation. So, and there's a lot of implications, you know, that we particularly see from various different customers in very different parts of the organisation as well. So, you know, how do organisations navigate, you know, allowing productivity tools, wanting productivity tools and capability within their organisation, but sort of how do you navigate the complexities of, you know, the security angle that we have to deal with versus the productivity gains that, you know, we expect to see out of these tool sets?
Yeah. Well, there has to be a balance, right? You have the legal requirements, laws, regulation, frameworks that kind of, some of them may be a bit more prescriptive of how you're using it and what you're using. And, you know, with the DTA's guidance last year, the new European AI law that came out, it's hard to navigate. You want your employees to be productive, but you also want to meet your regulatory requirements when it comes to AI use in your organization. And I think that's where you have to assess your needs and look at use cases and find what matches with the regulatory environment you're operating under. For example, like, you know, we work with a law firm and he's doing a Bedrock implementation where they're putting legal cases in there and they're able to query those legal cases. And he found that there was a bit of drift, but then they also ran into the situation of shadow AI use where they were being general and he didn't want to be prescriptive on how they used AI, but they were able to gather data on what they were using and then eventually come to a balance. So I think a lot of it was just testing and playing with it and then coming up with a balance between the legal requirements and being productive and using it efficiently.
I'd probably just add to that, I think putting security controls as an afterthought never works well, and typically costs more as well. I would say probably the other two things that I agree with everything you said, Shannon, but I think the two key things are having all your stakeholders involved. So it isn't just compliance, it's you want the people who are building to understand, you don't want them to be adversaries, which I've seen in previous jobs, and definitely, again, it doesn't help security. You definitely want everyone to be involved. You want all the stakeholders, compliance, staff, management, everyone should understand. And then I just think the key is visibility. So knowing you've got traffic to an AI provider really doesn't tell you that much, because it doesn't tell you how it's being used. And it also doesn't necessarily tell you the magnitude of the problem you might have. So visibility into what's actually being sent is the key thing, because you can't protect what you can't see.
Exactly.
So that, I'd say those are probably the additional two things.
I would add that it's interesting because I looked into Subrosa and I love the approach, and I think it's very important for organizations that are trying things out to leverage tools that are going to simplify the compliance for you. And because compliance it can be a very big topic. Like one of the recent announcements we made is a generative AI security scoping matrix. And I know it's not an easy answer. You know, how do you secure Gen AI in the cloud? Here's your single paragraph answer. It's a more nuanced approach. And what I like about the matrix is that it differentiates several types of Gen AI use cases. So when you're dealing with consumer apps, for example, you have some regulations that you got to adhere by. There's some security customizations that you may or may not be able to do. If you move into the enterprise tools, those are different, and they give administrators a lot more control. But what happens if you're building an application and you're using pre-trained models? Or what happens if you go a layer above and you're fine-tuning a model? What risks are you introducing in security controls that you need to think about? And if you go to the last one is if you're self-training a model yourself. And so it's very nuanced. Each of these use cases, the further you go to the right, the more security controls you need to think about, the more risks you need to think about. And so the matrix that I just mentioned, maybe we need to add a link in the description. It's a good approach to think about all the different all the different areas and considerations that you need to think.
I think it'd probably be quite helpful for threat modeling as well, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's a really cool matrix, and you're right, it is a bit of a tongue tie as well. But yeah, we'll try and add something into the show notes, definitely. And if not, it's certainly on the AWS blogs. I think there's about 3 or 4 different blogs. Came out, if I'm not mistaken, 2023, thereabouts, but I think it's about 5 or 6 different pillars. But that helps, describe the behaviour or the outputs and the requirements that you should be thinking about from those particular areas. But super, super cool. It's interesting. I think, we're talking about, injecting security earlier on. It feels like, what are we now coining Gen AI SecOps now? Yeah. Another one. But I did not frame that, by the way. Please don't use that. It's terrible.
It's yours.
Terrible.
You can have it. You can have it. DNX IP.
I don't think we want it. It's fine. What are some of the practical things, though, right? Let's give the audience here some real things that you can actually do. Some practical instances of where you could be thinking about or applying some sort of those security controls and measures. Particularly if they're thinking about, building applications, as you rightly pointed out, Gerardo, around, some of those applications that might use some of those pre-trained models. You're fine-tuning a model, or you might be building a model. So what should we think about?
You want to take it up?
I think, I don't want to take Gerardo's thunder here, but if you can purchase a preset, something like Bedrock, right? Or and you can choose the model, or you can automatically have a drop-down menu, set the security settings in there. Something like Bedrock would be useful for a customer that doesn't want to do a lot of its own development into the controls surrounding the AI that it's hosting in there. A use case for that is maybe, recently we just talked to a customer who has a chat bot, and it's customer facing. I think a ton of the AI chat bots and stuff that are out there are related to something that's customer facing, right? So the use case for them was to set something up that's foundationally secure from the get-go using Bedrock that doesn't drift as much. They haven't discovered any drift or any weird things with the AI yet that they could deploy within days, and they did. But all it does is answer basic questions from their Q&A, tech support repo, a lot of stuff they pulled from Jira. They took a lot of unstructured data, structured it, and fed it to the AI, and that was one of the biggest use cases for them. And unfortunately, probably a few people lost their job because of it, but they didn't require the outsourcing company that they had in outside Australia to actually do a lot of that work, thanks to Bedrock, AWS.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah. Something I personally appreciate about Bedrock is it's very, very clear the sovereignty of the data you send to it, where it's going to go, and it's very, very clear how it's going to be used. Yeah. This is something you don't necessarily get with some of the other AI service providers. And for our use cases, it's definitely been something, it's just been very easy. And it also lets us attest to customers who ask that question very often, where does data go? It's right here in Australia.
Right here, Sydney region, yeah.
AP Southeast too. So it's, now there's a few caveats to that. Certain models aren't in Sydney, but within the parameters of what's documented, you can make those claims to your customers and you can prove that they're correct, compared to some of the other providers where it's a lot more opaque.
Yeah.
Look, and your question around what practical things that customers can do. One is on the consumer apps. One is getting awareness, what are my users actually using and how are they using it, and that's super powerful because it could be a massive way of losing data or intellectual property, and tools like yours fit this use case pretty well. The second thing is, if you're building applications, then you should by default leverage guardrails. Yeah. So whatever tool you use, and if it's Bedrock, you got the Bedrock guardrails, or if you're using Amazon Q, then you also have the guardrails. And the guardrails are evolving over time, but in the simplest way that I can summarize it is, first, it's harmful content. So it prevents the user from either prompting with or receiving harmful stuff that you simply don't want in your enterprise application. And the second part is related to data privacy. So if you're sharing some intellectual property that you shouldn't, or personally identifiable information, all of that, the guardrail itself can help you anonymize it or hide it from the model so that it actually doesn't leave the user. So I would say that one of the first things that I would look at if I were building an application from scratch is the guardrails that are available with the tooling that I'm using.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. You mentioned about being harmful or receiving content, right? So constitutional AI. Anthropic have got a very big paper around, I think it's about 30 odd pages. It's a very interesting read in terms of a model being harmful or harmless, but then also being helpful or helpless. Right? And there's a fine balance between how much do you control the model in terms of the way that it responds. It's just not helpful anymore. It's super nice to you, like the way that it responds. Right? It's very polite. And
you want it to be tough.
Exactly, but you want it to respond. Yeah, exactly. But you don't want the response coming back that is going to cause harm. And that's that whole concept of constitutional AI. So that's really interesting. One other point that you mentioned as well, like guardrails, right? So putting around guardrails, which allow, put some control around it. The last bit that, we've touched on here a little bit, and I'd love to just expand on this a little bit more, is around knowledge bases or RAG and things like that, right? So being able to ingest the right type of data, cleansing the right data that you have, whether it's structured or unstructured, it doesn't really matter. But having a process in place that says, you know what, this is the only area that you can go and get this information from. But it's quite interesting as well, like being able to have ACL respect, that I might be able to see certain bits of the data, you may not. Right? But having that ACL respect between the two boundaries to be able to say, here's my RAG, but you can't go into all of it. Right, so yeah, some really interesting points there. I'd love to, I'm very mindful of time, and I certainly appreciate everyone's time here as well. I'd love to share a little bit of advice. What's the last little bit of advice? But also, as we sort of give some advice as well, what's the trend or the thing that you're expecting to see this year in terms of Gen AI, security, compliance, guardrails, all of that sort of stuff that we've really unpacked today? Shannon?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think one of the biggest is agentic AI, right? Agent AI. It's all the talk of the town right now, and you have a lot of SaaS platform providers and companies out there kind of sweating it. There was a company, it was actually a YouTube video of a guy. He was using Ryuk, he was using Jira, he was using Employment Hero, a lot of the similar tools people use to keep control, keep track of HR stuff. And he literally replaced all those tools with an agent.
Wow.
And so he could he had one agent that was set up for HR activities. They could just ask it to create a graph, ask it to build a spreadsheet, ask it to do anything, and it did it all. So I think a lot of SaaS providers out there are going to be, they need to wake up and see what these agents are going to do. So
something I actually think is very interesting there too. So I think there's technical and there's also policy challenges around this. So the technical issues of orchestration and managing data between agents and then compounding errors, and also routing flows. So this is actually something we're going to be exploring in our product in 2025. So actually providing our implementation as an integration that you could put into an agentic pipeline, which we're actually super excited about. But the thing I actually think is probably most interesting in this space is when you have AI agents acting autonomously or semi-autonomously on behalf of a person, and they make a decision that's not in that person's interest, or they commit a crime, what is the accountability framework for this? So this is also potentially going to be different in different countries based on how legal systems and courts interpret it. But this, for me, is one of the most fascinating things. And everyone talks about, the things I hear is like the power and then error rates are like the most common things I hear people talking about now. But I think the thing that everyone wants to be thinking about, and particularly security and policy and compliance people, is what about the accountability? So like the GM example and the Air Canada as well, of tricking a chatbot into giving a cheap thing. Air Canada's one actually got upheld in court as well. So how does this compound with more complex decisions made by machines, and who owns the consequences of that? And that's, for me, that's super interesting. There's a little bit of precedent with self-driving cars in some countries, but this is, I think, one of the things that people will be waking up to in 2025. And I think that's a fascinating thing to be exploring.
Yeah.
2025, I agree. Definitely the year of agentic AI. It's fascinating how you can have now. The way that I see agentic AI is it's some software that has the ability to reason, and because it can implement multiple steps of logic, and that's unprecedented. Like you said, SaaS applications. Any SaaS application can be an agent, can be reduced to an agent. It's incredible. The second thing is the amount of models is huge. So two things. The first one is, and maybe this is mid-2024, but open source models have caught up, and now we have pretty serious and sophisticated open source models that are available, and so that gives power to enterprises and to organizations to use them. But we're going to continue seeing companies like Anthropic, for example, just pushing the envelope and continue to deliver more or smarter models. And I would say, I think we're going to start seeing more customized and maybe tailored models. We're already seeing that models that are for embeddings, of course, is an easy one. For software development, Meta has one of their Llama ones is specialized for software development, and we're going to continue to see more of that for medical use cases, for accounting use cases, for law, and that makes the models more optimized. So that it makes it smaller. Cost is going to be, or the cost equation is going to be better if your model is customized to what you're trying to do, and so it just helps the adoption of the technology. So I'm really excited about 2025. Things are moving so fast that it's almost impossible to keep up.
Scary, yeah.
I agree. I think this year we're going to, like last year, we saw sort of the evolvement of Gen AI, right, into what it could do. I think I agree. Like this year, the agentic AI is leaps and bounds coming forward, right? And I think we're going to see a little bit more in terms of what it can actually do. I think at the moment we're still at probably a agentic workflow as opposed to agentic automation. I think there's still a little bit of a concern around the whole automation component, right? To your point, it making a decision that may not be correct. But that just comes again down to how you build the agentic approach. And I agree. Like there's very customized models for industries. And I think we're starting to see a little bit around that as well, but supervised agentic stuff as well. There's so much really cool stuff that's going to happen in the space. But folks, we're out of time, unfortunately. I wish we could unpack a lot more. There's probably about a bunch of different other areas that we could sort of go into. But I sincerely appreciate all of your time sort of coming in here today and sharing some of the insights and knowledge. It's been certainly very informative from my perspective. I've certainly learned something as well. So, to our audience, if you guys are interested in learning more about secure AI implementation on AWS, you can certainly reach out to both Shannon and Gerardo as well. For those interested in shadow AI protection and visibility, Dushan and the team at Subrosa AI are here to help. Thank you for joining us for this AI-focused security discussion. Stay secure, that's a mouthful, and keep innovating responsibility. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the DNX Solutions podcast. Follow us on socials or visit dnx.solutions for more.